Okay, so retirement, right? Everyone always pictures it as this endless vacation, like finally kicking back, pursuing those passions, maybe becoming a pickleball champion, who knows?
Right, the golden years.
Exactly. But what if that dream is like way harder to reach than we think? That's what we're unpacking today, diving into this book, The Retirement Trap. Is there hope?
Yeah, it's a good one.
It really makes you think.
Yeah.
And it doesn't sugarcoat anything, which is why we're going to break it all down. We'll get into what's making retirement so tricky these days and hopefully find some of that hope the title promises. Ready to dive in.
Absolutely, let's do it.
So the book jumps right in, challenging that whole golden years myth. Remember when, like, you could work at a company for life, retire comfortably with a pension?
Yeah, my grandpa had that. Worked at the same factory for decades. Retired with a pension, no problem.
Right. It's like that whole idea of security has vanished.
Yeah, and the book really digs into how that happened. It wasn't always this way. See, companies used to offer these defined benefit plans, which is basically a fancy term for pensions. You knew exactly what you were getting, guaranteed retirement income.
Okay, so like a guaranteed slice of retirement cake.
Exactly. But now most companies offer defined contribution plans like 401ks. So instead of baking that cake for you, they're handing you the ingredients and saying, good luck.
Soaked is kind of terrifying, especially with the cost of living going through the roof. I mean, even if you're diligently putting money away, can you even save enough these days?
Right. It's a huge concern. And the book really highlights that. It's not just about like saving more, it's that our wages haven't kept up with the rising cost of, well, everything.
Yeah, it's like everything's more expensive.
It's true. They had this really shocking statistic about worker productivity.
Oh, yeah, I remember this. It was about how much worker productivity has increased compared to wages. Right.
Exactly. Worker productivity has shot up like 60% since the late 70s, but wages have only inched up by like 17%. That's a massive gap.
It's like running up a down escalator.
Yeah,
You're putting in the effort, but going nowhere.
it's a good analogy. And for retirees living on a fixed income, that's where things get really tough, right?
Mm.
Imagine your savings buying less and less each year as prices keep climbing.
Yeah, it's scary to think about.
That's the reality for so many retirees, especially when you consider things like housing costs and healthcare, which, speaking of, have you noticed how healthcare costs always seem to be in the news?
Always. It feels like it's only a matter of time until we're all eating ramen noodles just to afford our medications.
Right. It's a huge concern. And honestly, it's one of the things that makes this whole retirement thing even scarier. It's like, even if you do manage to save enough, one medical emergency could wipe it all out.
Okay, so speaking of things that keep me up at night, let's talk about Social Security.
No.
The book really didn't hold back on this one. It actually made me kind of nervous about the whole thing.
Yeah, it's definitely something to be aware of.
Okay, so no sugarcoating here.
Mm-hmm.
What's the deal with Social Security? Is it really as shaky as everyone says?
Well, the book lays out a pretty stark picture of the challenges facing Social Security, and it's not just a rumor. There's a serious funding gap.
Okay, so no sugarcoating here.
Yeah.
What does that even mean, a funding gap? Like, is Social Security going to disappear completely?
Well, not necessarily disappear completely, but it's more about whether Social Security can afford to pay out the full benefits promised to everyone.
So it might not be there when we need it.
It's possible. See, with so many baby boomers retiring and fewer people paying into the system, that pot of money might not stretch far enough.
That makes sense. I hadn't thought about it like that.
Yeah, and in fact, the book suggests that the Social Security Trust Fund could be depleted within the next decade or so.
Depleted. Wow. Okay. So what does that mean for people like right now who are counting on those benefits?
That's where things get a little uncertain.
So if the trust fund is depleted, does that mean benefit cuts or on the table?
Yeah, it's a real possibility. Some projections suggest, like, benefit cuts of up to 25% might be needed to keep Social Security afloat.
25%. Ouch. It's easy to get caught up in these big numbers, but I think the book does a great job of bringing it down to a personal level. With those real life stories, it's like,
Totally. Those stories are what make this whole issue really hit home.
right. Like, remember Margaret, the retired teacher?
Yeah, Margaret, living solely on Social Security. Tough situation.
Barely making ends meet.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
heartbreaking.
And her story shows how Social Security was never meant to be someone's only income, right? It was designed to supplement pensions, savings, the whole nine yards.
Which, as we've been discussing, a lot of those other pieces are kind of missing these days.
Exactly. It's like the whole foundation is kind of shaky.
Yeah. And speaking of shaky foundations, the book also shared Frank's story, the factory worker. Remember him? whose pension was slashed after his company went bankrupt.
Oh, man, Frank. That's rough.
Forced back to work as a security guard at almost 70 just
Right.
to, keep up with bills. It makes you wonder what you can really rely on these days.
Right. It makes you think about your own situation. And then there's Barbara, who had to sell her business to cover medical bills.
Oh, yeah, Barbara. Even with Medicare, they were drowning in debt.
Hmm.
And she had her own business, too, which you'd think.
You'd think that would offer some security, right? But her story highlights, like, a really crucial point about retirement. Healthcare costs can absolutely devastate even the best laid plans.
It's true. You never know what curveballs life is going to throw at you.
Right. Even with Medicare, you've got things like dental, vision, long-term care,
All those extra costs.
and those can wipe out a lifetime of savings, easy.
Okay, so we've covered some pretty, let's say, sobering scenarios here. But the book doesn't just leave us wringing our hands in despair, does it? There's got to be some light at the end of this tunnel.
Oh, absolutely. It's not all doom and gloom.
Okay, good. What kind of solutions are we talking about here?
Well, the book explores two main avenues: policy reforms and individual strategies.
Okay, so the big picture stuff and then what we can do on our own, right?
Exactly. And they both have the potential to make a real difference.
Got it. So let's start with the policy stuff. What kind of big picture changes are they suggesting?
So when it comes to Social Security, one of the proposals that keeps coming up is raising the retirement age.
Yeah, that seems to be the go-to solution these days, but I don't know. Is it really fair to make people work longer?
Yeah, it's definitely controversial. The reasoning is that with people living longer, the system as it is just isn't sustainable. It wasn't designed for today's lifespans.
Right, I get that. But what about people who physically can't work longer? Like construction workers, nurses. Those jobs are hard on the body. You can't expect everyone to be working into their 70s.
Absolutely, and the book acknowledges those nuances. Another proposal they talk about is raising the income cap on Social Security taxes. So right now, there's a limit on how much of your income is taxed for Social Security.
Right, right. I vaguely remember learning about that.
So removing or even just raising that cap would bring in more revenue to help close that funding gap.
Makes sense. But something tells me that wouldn't be a very popular idea for, those high earners.
Probably not, but again, it's about finding solutions that benefit everyone, right? Not just a select few. Another big one the book pushes for is expanding access to retirement plans, especially for people in the gig economy.
Oh, that's a good point.
Hmm.
I have a friend who drives for one of those ride-sharing apps, and he's always stressed about retirement because he doesn't have a 401k.
Exactly. So many people are working in these types of jobs these days, and they often miss out on those traditional benefits. And then finally, the book really advocates for tackling healthcare costs directly.
Yeah, like we were saying earlier, that feels like the biggest wild card in all of this.
Totally. Things like expanding Medicare to cover more services, allowing Medicare to negotiate drug prices, those could make a huge difference for retirees.
Okay, these all sound like, great ideas in theory, but if I'm being honest, I'm a little skeptical about how likely any of those things are to actually happen, especially anytime soon.
Yeah.
It feels like we're talking about some pretty big systemic changes.
Oh, absolutely. And these are complex issues. There are no easy fixes. But the good news is the book doesn't just leave us at the mercy of policy changes. It also offers some really practical advice for what individuals can do right now to take control of their retirement.
Okay, yes, give us the good stuff. What can we do, starting today, to feel a little bit better about all of this? So we're talking actionable steps here, right? Things we can actually do ourselves while we wait for the bigger things to fall into place.
Exactly. And it's not even about cutting back on lattes or anything. It's about really shifting your mindset, building a more resilient future.
Love that. So where do we start?
Well, they really emphasize diversifying your income streams, not putting all your eggs in one basket, as they say.
Right. So Social Security is great and all, but
But it can't be the only plan, right? That's where things like, side hustles come in, even part-time work.
have you considered any side hustles, now that you mention it?
Yeah. Honestly, reading this book got me thinking about maybe teaching a course online in my field. There are so many platforms for that now. What about you? Ever thought about a side hustle?
Oh, totally. I've always thought about, turning my love for baking into something, maybe sell at a farmer's market or something.
See, you already have a great idea. It's all about finding those passions and seeing if there's a way to, generate a little income from them.
That's true. That's true. Okay, so what about investing? Because they mentioned that in the book too, right?
Yeah.
I have to admit, that's always felt a little intimidating to me.
Totally get it. It can feel overwhelming. But the key is starting small. The book actually walks through some basic investing principles in a very approachable way. And honestly, there are so many resources out there now, apps and websites that make it much easier, even for beginners.
Oh, good to know. It's easy to just avoid it all when it seems too complicated.
Right. But that's kind of what the book is trying to help you avoid, like that knowledge is power. Even understanding the basics makes a huge difference.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've got side hustles, we've got investing. What about this idea of semi-retirement? That really stuck with me.
Yeah, me too. It's like a whole different way to think about retirement, right?
Like, it doesn't have to be this hard stop to working.
Exactly. It's more about finding that balance, maybe reducing your hours,
Mm,
transitioning to consulting, or finding something part-time that lets you kind of ease into it.
right. It's less abrupt that way, too. Like, instead of this sudden drop in income, you're slowly adjusting.
Precisely. It gives you more control over your time, your finances, the whole 9 yards.
This is great. So much good stuff to think about. We've got practical tips on, like, making extra money, managing finances, even rethinking that whole timeline.
Yeah.
But there was one more thing in the book that really got me thinking. They talked about those alternative housing options, tiny homes, co-housing, all that. Have you ever considered anything like that?
Oh, yeah, the tiny homes thing has always intrigued me. It's such a different way to think about housing, especially as you get older.
Well, it's like the ultimate downsize, right?
Right. Simplifying, smaller footprint could even free up some cash flow by, downsizing those housing costs. Plus, imagine the freedom of being able to just pick up and travel with your house.
That's what appeals to me. It's not even just downsizing. It's like this whole adventurous lifestyle.
Exactly. And co-housing, while maybe not as mobile, offers that built-in community. And that's so important as we age.
Like, you get to choose your neighbors,
Yeah.
build that support system.
And potentially share costs and resources, which, hey, never hurts.
It's amazing how this book makes you really rethink those assumptions about what retirement should look like.
Totally. What do you want it to be? That's the question.
So many possibilities. So as you're thinking about your own retirement, do any of these, like, alternative models resonate? Would downsizing to a tiny home let you retire earlier? Maybe. Or would a co-housing community fit your ideal vision? These are big questions, I know. But hey, asking them now can make for a much more fulfilling future. It's been awesome unpacking all of this with you. The Retirement Trap. Is there hope? Definitely lives up to its name, lays out the challenges, but then gives us those steps to actually take action. It's a good reminder that even with all the unknowns, we've got some power to shape how things turn out.
Couldn't agree more.